On January 25th, Sean Kirkby sat down with State Senator Tim Cullen discussing his candidacy for the governorship.
So, Senator Cullen, you've been out of the state spotlight since the late 1980s when you last served as former Governor Tommy Thompson's Secretary of Health and Human Services. What made you run for state senate again in 2010?
Well, after that I spent 20 years in the private sector, and I retired in 2007. And then I served 3 years in the Janesville School Board, which is a non-paid school board, which is great, really public service. And had no intention of ever running, again for state office. And then the incumbent state senator down there, Senator Judy Robson, retired. I wasn't going to run again, and I thought, well, I can do that job. I've done that before, and I'm not the kind of guy that can go golfing every day, and I don't fish, and so I thought, this is something I can do, and I think we're on this earth to give back. I don't think we're here to just take, and so I thought I could contribute, so I ran.
Why did you file and run for governor?
Well, I looked pretty clear to me that there was going to be a recall election. It was very clear to me early on that with the energy of 30,000 people out gathering signatures, that they were going to get the signatures and there was going to be an election. And so I looked at who was considering running, and I thought, well, why not me? Why don't I have something to offer? And so I decided to get in the race and see what happens. I've never run statewide before. I don't have the name recognition of some other candidates, but I think this is going to be such a high-profile race that, in fact, you don't have name recognition on the front end will be solved just by the media attention. And I think if you're the candidate, you'll have close to 100% name recognition by election day. So I decided to get in. I thought I offered something different than hadn't been in politics all my life. It's half my life in the public sector, half in the private sector. So I thought I offered something different. I understand business. I understand government. I ran the largest state agency for a couple of years. Been the Senate Majority Leader for 4.5 years. So I thought I offered a range of experience that might be appealing to the voters.
How has the Senate changed from when you last served as Majority Leader?
Well, in just about every way except the chamber is still in the same place. What's really happened in Wisconsin politics and in the state Senate is what I would call the collapse of the political center. And by that I mean the political center, there's no longer there was a political center when I was here before in the Republican caucus, and there was a political center in the Democratic caucus. So you had people in both caucuses who had as much in common with a few other people in the other caucus as they did with the rest of their party members. And that whole center has collapsed. There's almost no independent, centrist Republicans left at all. And the same with Democrats. The parties have moved further apart. And so that's probably the biggest change. The level of civility is probably a little less than it was then, but it's not too bad. But the desire to work across the aisle in a bipartisan way is almost gone. That's really kind of the biggest change. And that big change, I think, is brought about by the fact there's so much more money in campaigns, either directly spent by the candidates or by independent expenditure groups who we don't even know who they are or where their money comes from, but they dominate the races much more than the candidate's own campaign. So those are the big changes: the collapse of the political center, and which I think is fueled by the enormous increases in the amount of money.
If you did receive a Democratic nomination and won a recall election, what would be your main goals as governor?
Well, I think the first thing I would try to do as governor is reduce some level, as best I can, the level of anger and division that exists in this state. This governor has angrily divided the state in a way I've never seen in my adult lifetime, and I don't think he can ever reunite the state. And so I would focus on that. I would get to focus back on jobs. I would get to focus back on respecting the university system, the students of the university, the public education system, the K-12 system. Teachers, this governor has made teachers to be just sort of like members of a union. union thugs sometimes, he refers to them as, rather than the teachers of our children. The people who spend more waking hours with our children than do the best of parents. I mean, you think about teachers are with kids in the K-12 system 6-7 hours a day. The best parents don't spend 6 or 7 waking hours with their kids on a school day. And so I think renewed respect for teachers, to just destroy collective bargaining when it wasn't necessary, and that's what he did. I think we need to try to restore collective bargaining. We need to make it easier for people to vote, not more difficult. He's taken a direct shot at certain groups of people with the voting law. I call it the voter suppression law. I'd like to undo a lot of that. It takes aim at senior citizens, at college students, at renters, and low-income people, making it more difficult for them to vote, more hoops to go through. And it's contrary to 230 years of American history, where we've expanded the rights to vote, made it easier to vote. There was a time when African Americans couldn't vote. There was a time when women couldn't vote. You had to be 21 to vote at one time. There was no such thing as absentee ballot then. There was no such thing as early voting. We've done all these things. There's election day registration. There's been a whole, the flow of history is to expand the right of Americans to vote. And now this governor has reversed that. And by sheer coincidence, I don't think it is, the groups that he's made it more difficult to vote are groups of people who tend sometimes, but not always, to vote Democratic. Not always. But interesting, the ones who are messed up and forced to go through loops tend to be people who have not voted for the governor and his party. So I work on all that. I think we need to recognize more and more that high school students are not all headed towards the four-year university system. And our whole high school curriculum is geared towards that presumption that you're going to go to a four-year college. And I hope a lot of people do. But we need to have a curriculum in the high school that recognizes that some people are headed towards the technical colleges and give them a chance to get ready for that career path rather than just a path to the four-year schools. And we need to do something about tuition. I mean, we are now, I think, in the 5th consecutive year of 5% or more increase in tuition. For my part, I would support a law and sign a law as governor that caps tuition increases at 2% or the consumer price index or something. Because while there's almost no inflation, we're having tuition increases go up. And part of that this year has been driven by the state cuts to the university system. But in prior years, it wasn't so much cuts. It was just that the university had the capacity. The university had the capacity to raise tuition, and no one really can fight it. And since we're giving a lot of state money, state taxpayers money to the university system, I think we have a right to put some limits on how much they can just whop on the students, in forms of tuition increases. Because there's I think you saw a story where there's more student debt than there is credit card debt in America. I mean, it's a serious problem.
You've listed a lot of goals for being governor, but if you did receive the Democratic nomination and want to recall election, how would you work with a Republican Assembly and a possibly pending recall Republican Senate to accomplish your goals?
Well, that's sort of been who I've been, all of my political life is a willingness to work across the aisle. You can talk to almost any legislator around here who was here then or watch me now. I try to get along with and get to know Republican legislators and try to work with them where I can. We're going to have disagreements. There's a reason why I'm a Democrat and they're a Republican, but I have a reputation and it is sort of in my DNA, if you will, to try to work with people, to reach compromises. One of my favorite quotes is from late President Lyndon Johnson, who, when talking about compromise, said that anyone not willing to settle for half a loaf has never been hungry. And I always thought that made a lot of sense, and that sort of reflects me. That it doesn't mean that you don't have strong convictions and values about what you want, but you get as much as you can accomplished with the other party in a compromise if necessary, and then you come back again and get the rest of what you want. But you're willing to settle for half a loaf for the time being, because that's better than nothing.
Earlier you mentioned that a political center has sort of been missing from the Senate. Do you think you could restore that?
Well, I can't restore it as governor, and that's something that I can't restore. The campaign finance laws have got so completely out of whack now. We don't know who's giving what to whom, and the outside groups have names that all of us would love. They're always Citizens for a Better Tomorrow or something. You can't tell anything by their name what they really want, and you don't know who gave them the money. You can't tell who they're for and against by the tone of their ads. But until we get some kind of handle on that money, at least disclosure of who's giving the money, that would be giant progress right there. We're only going to have those groups, be they left-wing or right-wing, they're only going to keep encouraging more left-wing Democrats to win and more right-wing Republicans to win. Until we get a handle on that money, I think it's going to be hard to create a center.
You've served, as you mentioned, on the Janesville School Board, the Janesville Teacher Diversity Board, and currently the Committee on Education. What do you think of the state of education in Wisconsin right now?
I think it has to improve. I think we're challenged by not just how we're doing against some other state, but we're challenged by how we're doing against other nations. This is a completely global economy, and we have to be as good as China and India, and public education. I think we need to look more at focus completely on student achievement, and figure out measurements of student achievement. But we have to have a system of public education where we're seeing students do better as they go through the system. What we have too much now is that where the student is at the starting line of kindergarten, whether they're ready to go or whether they're sort of behind the starting line and not ready to go. Too often that achievement gap at the beginning of kindergarten tends to exist all the way through, that the student that was behind the starting line in kindergarten is still not doing that well in 8th grade. And that's not acceptable there. We have to close that and focus on that. And I tried to do that in the school board, and it would be a big deal to me if I were governor.
Okay. The UW system is currently facing another $69.1 million cut due to budget lapses after receiving approximately $250 million cut in the biennium budget. How do you think the UW system of schools should best deal with these cuts? And if you did become governor, what would you do about them?
Well, I think, for example, in this budget bill, where they were cutting the university system by $250 million, for the first time ever, this governor and this Republican majority took $160 million out of the general fund. This is the money that usually goes to schools, and they gave it to the transportation fund for major highway construction, not even for fixing potholes and mass transit, just for major highway construction. It's $160 million that could have been available to the university system, and it always had been available. The first time they gave it to transportation. So I would stop doing that, and I would have the money that's in the general fund keep going for what it's supposed to go for, which is education, healthcare, and things like that. And let the transportation fund itself with gas taxes and license fees. If they need more money, come and ask for it, but don't take it away from education.
You were discussing earlier about voter ID. If you did become governor, would you try to work with the legislature to overturn the voter ID laws, or would you wait on a decision in the courts?
Well, I'd love to have the courts fix it, but if they didn't and it looked like it was going to be a protracted legal dispute, I would try to get the legislature to reverse a lot of it. And I think there may be an opportunity there, because right now the public is not particularly angry about the so-called voter ID bill, or the voter suppression bill as I call it, because there hasn't been an election run with this new set of rules and all these little details in the thing. I could go on for a half hour about how that bill, in various little ways, is going to disrupt people. You can talk to any county clerk in the state. So I think once an election, the first relatively big one is going to be the April spring election. Once an election is run under these new rules, and people are not able to vote who didn't know about all the complicated new rules, and they've been regular voters, but they don't happen to have a voter ID card, I think there's going to be a real backlash against this law, and I think that's going to be an opportunity to change it. And certainly, when we have the huge turnouts we're going to have next November, this coming November, and probably in the gubernatorial recall election, when more and more people are disrupted and not allowed to vote because of all these barriers that they put in. See, it was sold to the people as stopping fraud. That's one of the great Trojan horse explanations of all time. Because this bill has about 0.5% to do with fraud and about 99.5% to do with making it difficult for certain groups of people to vote. And an election, the public will wake up when they actually experience the law.
Job creation is a key issue on both sides of the aisle right now. What initiatives would you support to create more jobs in Wisconsin?
Well, we have, one of them has been called the venture capital bill. I think it's more it's more like a startup capital bill. It's about getting money in the hands of startup companies that have ideas for products and services, but they don't have the capital to move forward quickly. They have the idea, they have the product idea, and giving them some startup money to help them get faster from the startup stage to the hiring of people stage, I think is one of the more important things we can do. I think we also need to look at the vocational technical college system and make sure that that their classes and their programs, which quite often are 2-year programs, whether they need to be 2 years, whether an employer really needs somebody with 2 years of welding, or whether you could have 6 months of welding and then the employer hire them, and the employer will then continue the training for the exact kind of welding they're doing. Right now, it's all so structured. It's a 2-year course. Well, employers don't necessarily need 2-year courses. And then university students, it's a case of having sort of a new economy here that attracts university graduates from Madison that can stay here in Wisconsin and get jobs that reflect the degree and expertise that they've earned, rather than having to go out of state, which is happening far too often. But our other thing is the governors who try to tell the people of Wisconsin that they elect me governor and I will create X number 100,000 jobs, or this governor said 250,000. Governors don't create jobs. Jobs are created when you're running a business and the consumer demand for your product or service exceeds what your current workforce can produce for your customer base. And when you can't meet your customer base's needs, you hire another person or more to meet their needs. That's how a job is created. It isn't created because some politician in Madison says, I will create. And a lot of that is related to the national economy. Wisconsin governors can help in the margins. We can help make it better in Wisconsin than somewhere else. The idea that the governor of Wisconsin can dictate the economy of Wisconsin and the jobs that are created simply isn't true. And every governor, I think before this governor, understood that.
Earlier you mentioned that you'd push for reinstating collective bargaining rights if you were governor. How would you do that with the current political situation in Wisconsin?
Well, it'll be difficult, but the reality is that for the governor's solution to the budget, he needed to get public employees to pay more for the pension, more for their health insurance. The public employers were willing to do that. And that's all he needed to do, if his goal was to balance the budget. But what he did was he couldn't help himself. He didn't stop there. He went on to destroy collective bargaining, which had little to do with the money needed to balance the budget, and was certainly unfair in the sense that public employees didn't create this budget deficit. It was decisions made in this capital in the last 20 years that created the deficit. And yet he made public employees the scapegoats for all the problems, and the entire solution was funded on their back. But what I would try to argue with the legislature is we can restore collective bargaining and bring some level of peace to the state without endangering or unbalancing the budget.
How would you deal with a budget deficit then?
Well, I would see whether it's real or not, first of all, and then I would then I would try to see what is a fair way across the whole state. What caused the deficit, and then how do we fix it that's fair to everybody, and not pick out a slice of Wisconsin and say you're the problem, which is what this governor did.
You mentioned that you support campaign finance reform. What reforms would you like to put into place?
Well, the most important one is a simple matter of disclosure. That if people are going to give money that's going to get spent during political campaigns, the public has a right to know who it is that's giving the money and how much they're giving, and then the public can decide. You know, I don't like these ads that are being run by that group who support this candidate. I'm going to support somebody else. But right now, they don't know where the money's coming from, or name the committee that runs the ads. And with the Supreme Court decision, we can't abolish these independent expenditures. The Supreme Court needs unlimited amounts of giving, because the Supreme Court said a corporation is a person, and therefore it can give as much as it wants. It also said unions can too, but they don't have anywhere near the money that the corporations do. My reaction is, if a corporation is a person, how come they never have any children or grandchildren? You know, I mean, it's just absurd to say a corporation is a person, but that's what the court said. So live with the court. The court also said that you can require disclosure, and so I think that's the best thing we can do. I wish we could do more, but in the context of that decision, U.S. Supreme Court decision, disclosure is the best thing that we can get.
I just had a question going back to the spring protest. You have a reputation among conservatives, and blogger Ian Murphy's prank phone call, Governor Walker referred to you as the only reasonable one of the Democratic caucus, and a guy who was not there for political reasons, but trying to get something done. He also called you a pragmatist. Do you agree with this analysis, and how did this affect you at the time?
Well, I think he captured me pretty well, and I want to thank the governor for his endorsement. It's a wonderful endorsement to have. I think he did capture me. I think they caught him at a moment where he was, I think, expressing his true feelings. He thought he was talking to his friend, one of the Koch brothers. I was surprised he said all that, but then I realized that he didn't think it was ever going to get public, and I think he accurately described me.
Well, you also agree, he also said that you went to the private sector, made real money, became a little more open-minded, and then you voted with him a bunch of times. Are you worried that this might come back and haunt you during the campaign, during your campaign for governor?
I don't think so. I think, one of the things I'm doing, and I'm very open about it, is I am basically running a general election campaign from day one, which is not always the smartest way to win a primary. But I think the fact that I've been in the private sector, that I run a business unit, I've had employees reporting up to me at its peak, 4,000 employees. I do understand how business works, and I do understand how important it is when you are in charge of a business unit, that how important employee morale is. Every private business person in the state knows, that business leader knows, that one of the things they spend a lot of time on is the morale of their employees. Because an employee workforce that feels good about itself and feels appreciated is going to be a more productive workforce. It just kind of makes sense. So I think having that experience, I think, will appeal to a lot of voters in Wisconsin. I think it'll particularly appeal to independents. We're going to be asked to do something they've never done before, which is to throw out a governor after a year and a half of their term. I think they're going to want to know what they're going to get in exchange for that. Who's going to be the governor if it's not Governor Walker? And I think I can give them a comfort level that I understand government and the private sector, and this governor frankly doesn't. I mean, he came into office and said, I'm not going to talk to my employees. I'm not going to negotiate with my employees. And that's just not the way anybody who runs a business treats their employees. So I understand that, and he clearly doesn't.
Recently, you introduced legislation that takes on cyberbullying in school districts. What would this bill do, and why is it needed now?
Well, it's needed because it reflects, the world we live in now, which is the social networking and Facebook and so on. We have a law in the books that talks about making an attempt to get a handle on bullying and get school districts to monitor it and to act when they see it happen. But that law does not, in its definition of bullying, does not include cyberbullying. And so we're adding that to an existing statute because that's what people tell me, and I hear from school districts. And there's also a professor up at UW-Eau Claire who runs sort of a center on cyberbullying and bullying. And you're really not getting at bullying in the school system unless you also deal with cyberbullying. And the reason why it hasn't been in the statutes is that the school district said, well, cyberbullying doesn't occur on school grounds, and so that's why they did not include it in the statutes. Well, the cyberbullying that may not occur on school grounds, but the bullying, the physical bullying that happens, often happens on school grounds as a result of what was seen online somewhere. So we just want to sort of tighten that up and reflect the fact that you can't deal with bullying unless you deal with cyberbullying.
What other educational reforms could be pushed for?
Well, I talked about vocational, the technical colleges. I would also in the public school system right now. If you're going through a high school in Wisconsin, the state requires 13.5 credits. It's 3 of social studies and math, and 1.5 of 5, and so on. There's 13.5 core credits. Then each school district has 10 or 12 other credits, which each school district can decide what they are. And what I would do is I would, obviously keep those 13.5 core credits, but then have school districts have like 2 different curriculums for students that are headed to the 4-year college system. Be pretty much what the curriculum is today. For those who are not interested in that curriculum, they're on their way to a technical college. That you have a technical college type curriculum that they would take would speed up their ability to be successful in a technical college system. That's what I would change. Also, I think we need to have Chinese as a foreign language in all of our high schools. It's silly to have our major competitor in the world, they're all capable of speaking English over there, and we better learn to speak their language as well. And too often, in our school district, the foreign languages that were offered, and I led the effort to get now Chinese in the Janesville School District, but the foreign languages when I got there were Spanish, French, and German, which I pointed out were the perfect foreign languages to offer if this was the end of World War II. But of course it's not, and so we added Chinese. I also, one of the things that always has befuddled me, and a lot of people don't think about this, but why do we have all these seatbelt laws in cars and vehicles and trucks for kids, and they have to be in a car seat until they're a certain age, and they have to be in a seatbelt and so on. Yet we let school buses go across the state with students in them every day, thousands, tens of thousands of students, no seatbelts in school buses. It's never made any sense to me. And so I proposed and led the effort in Janesville, and now every new bus that the Janesville School District buys has seatbelts. And it is now the only school district in Wisconsin. On its way, we've got about 12 buses that have belts, and they buy new ones every year. It'll be the only school district in Wisconsin that has seatbelts in all their buses, and I'm pretty proud of that. So a lot of things to work on.
Do you support Assembly Bill 426 right now?
What, I don't know about the number.
The mining bill, sorry.
No, I absolutely, the Assembly bill is a bad bill. It takes away the contested case hearings, which are, it's a legal term that people can kind of glaze over when they hear it. But the important thing about a contested case hearing is it allows the citizens their one shot at the mining proposal, in this case, to go to court and have their say. And the other big thing about it is that in a contested case hearing, the mining company is under oath in a contested case hearing. So right now, a company can say to you or to anybody that wants to listen, we promise we'll do this, we'll protect the environment, we promise we'll do this. But they're not under oath. In a contested case hearing, they're under oath. Also, they changed, our environmental laws. And, it's one thing to change the time frame at which a permit needs to be decided. But the idea that if the DNR hasn't decided that it's deemed granted just because a certain time frame has elapsed is crazy. That just, all you do is wait out the time frame and then go ahead without DNR support. So, if the only thing I can conceivably imagine we could change would be to tighten the time frames for approval a little bit, but to change any environmental laws to reroute rivers and not know what's going to happen after they finish mining. And I really believe we're stewards of our air, land, and water. We're just here to leave it in at least as good a shape as we found it for the next generation to come. And what they're trying to do with that bill is say that there'll be a certain set of environmental standards for mining, and then other environmental standards for all the rest of what goes on in Wisconsin, building buildings or whatever. It's a bad bill, and I don't think it can pass the Senate, thank goodness.
If you were to win the Democratic nomination, what type of campaign would you run against Governor Walker?
I would run a campaign about what I would do as governor and why I'm a better choice for governor and how I will try to reunite the state in a way that he never can, that he divided it angrily and unnecessarily. That's the worst part about it. Not only did he divide it, but he did it unnecessarily. But I would talk about, my career, my background, my qualifications, and the things that I want to focus on, and run as positive a campaign as possible, knowing there's going to be an enormous negative campaign run against me or whoever the nominee is. And I don't intend to throw any dirt at him, but I do intend to respond directly when they throw dirt at me. And I'm afraid that's what the campaign is going to delve into is a very negative campaign, because his negatives are so high that there's no way that they can run a campaign that makes him popular. His negatives are so high. So his consultants are going to say, well, you've got to make the negatives of the Democratic candidate, their negatives as high as yours. So it's going to be dirt, dirt, dirt.
Senator Cullen, thank you for your time.